Hey guys, welcome back to Coach Hall Writes. Today's video is going to be looking at some student samples from my own classroom. So to give you a bit of context, this was a cold read timed write. Cold read means that they didn't know the prompt in advance. All they were told was that it was going to be a synthesis essay and a factors prompt. They did not know that it was the 2019 wind farm prompt, and they had never seen that prompt before. Also, a timed write means that they had only the amount of time that they would be allowed on the exam. So I timed them for a 15-minute reading period and a 40-minute writing period. If students finished reading the documents early, they were allowed to move on to the writing as they would be allowed to do on the exam. So because of that, these essays I think represent some of the common issues that students have when they are trying to write under pressure. So in this video, we're going to be talking about thesis statements and also the line of reasoning, how to structure your argument. So you'll see what I've highlighted in orange, that is the context, and then the red is an attempt at a thesis statement. I don't consider this thesis statement necessarily fully defensible, but I think it has a lot of potential. And so when I see a thesis statement in the intro that I might not award the thesis point to, then I go to the conclusion to see if there's a potential thesis statement there that would be defensible. Because remember, based on the rubric, you can have a thesis statement anywhere in the essay. So if it's in neither location, neither the intro or the conclusion, then I look at the topic sentences and concluding sentences of the body paragraphs in hopes that I could find a defensible thesis statement there. So in terms of context, this student tried to give some understanding of why this issue is important. Some students tend to just rephrase what is present on the opening page of the synthesis packet, or they include information from the sources. Other students are able to contextualize it based on information that they already know. So I think the student had a good idea of including some context here. I did that in orange to match my previous video about a line of reasoning. And then the thesis statement, it says, yes, it is important to care for the landscape's appearance. So we have a concession here, but then it says, but continuing to use nuclear power plants with traditional materials such as coal has proven to be harmful to the environment. Therefore, people should consider an alternative such as wind farms. Okay, so I like the fact that the student tried to do a concession and then refutation and a therefore statement. That's something I've taught in class. However, one tip I have is for students to make sure that it is very clear that they are answering the prompt at hand. So if I saw this thesis statement and I didn't know what the prompt was, I don't think I would think the prompt was which factors should an agency consider when establishing a wind farm. So one quick tip is, you can see it in the margin, I put because ... If we added a little bit more to that therefore sentence, it might make it more defensible. I rewrote the student's thesis and read beneath it because I wanted to try to keep the integrity of what he or she wanted to say, but make it more adaptable to the thesis statement itself. So you'll see the difference between what I corrected versus what the student wrote. So I think the student was on track here. It's just that we want to make sure that your thesis statement clearly answers the prompt at hand. So for a factors prompt, you want to make sure that you are clearly identifying factors that should be considered. So for the body paragraph, I put several comments on the side. So I'm going to kind of click through these and talk to you guys about what I noticed in this paragraph, and then I'm going to show you the same paragraph but color-coded differently so you can see some more about this concept of line of reasoning. So the first comment is based on that topic sentence, and I said you might want to describe what the farm looks like the wind farm looks like, to clarify for your reader. So it says, when passing a wind farm, the natural look of the field does look different, but it's not necessarily a negative thing. Now, I know what the student is talking about here, but this would be a really good opportunity to talk about how wind farms have large turbines. They're evenly spaced. You could talk about how they're usually white and perhaps industrial looking. You could talk about how you can't see the entire landscape behind it, but it might not impede the view too much. So I think this was an opportunity that the student could have used a bit more descriptive writing. But it's not necessarily a bad topic sentence. I think, though, it's a little bit too simplistic for an opening because we're jumping into this concept, and I know what the student wants to say here, but to really prove the point, I think descriptive writing would help. Now, the next sentence I highlighted in pink because I really like this idea. This is some commentary. It says, passing the turbines is no different than passing power lines that are put up beside the streets. It is something that people have become accustomed to. So I like the way the student is comparing wind turbines and a wind farm to power lines or telephone lines. Like, people don't even really notice them. So I think that line is really good, and I would keep it in a revision, but I think it would make more sense if we develop that intro into the paragraph a little bit. And then it says painting the turbines is not going to disguise them from being there. And we've got a source cited. So there's too much of a jump going from what the wind farms look like and how they really do blend in to painting the turbines, because we don't know why someone would consider painting the turbines. So we need a little bit of clarity here. So one solution that people have offered as far as making the wind turbines more aesthetically pleasing is to paint them. And so it sounds like the student is against this idea because it's not going to disguise them. So this is a good thought and it's an important thought, but we need to actually lead into that a little bit more. So this, I think, just highlights that sometimes when you have never seen the prompt before and you're doing it under time conditions, it's a little bit rushed. And so we have a line of reasoning here. It's just there's a lot that the reader has to fill in, and you don't want your reader or your scorer to have to fill in too many blanks. So there's just a pacing issue here. And then it says, eventually they become part of the earth and something that you barely notice. So I would prefer that students say one barely notices, just because you is a direct address to the reader. So we say one to mean someone or just a general person. So I like this idea. I would keep this idea, but I would develop it noticeably more. So it says, therefore, appearance should not be the downfall for choosing nuclear power plants over wind turbines. Okay, so it sounds like the student is saying that people might choose nuclear power plants instead of wind turbines because wind turbines don't look nice. Good thought, but that's not clearly developed. So we did have nuclear power plants referenced in the thesis, but we don't know why they're being referenced here. And again, this is one of those things where the student was probably just trying to get stuff on paper. And so the line of reasoning is not clearly connected for us as the reader. So I think it just goes to show that there are really good ideas here, but we just need to pace it a little bit more slowly so that your reader knows how your thoughts connect as a writer. So then it says, society must consider the Earth's future appearance. I like that we're connecting this idea of appearance, but I'm not so sure I understand where this is going. It says wind power does not release harmful gases the way coal does, and wind is something that we will not run out of. So it sounds like we're talking about the benefits and we're still comparing it to coal. I think that's an important factor to recognize, but I'm not sure it belongs here in the paragraph. In the long run, the gases will negatively hurt the Earth's climate and ecosystems. True, but how? What do you mean by this? So it sounds like we're worrying about the current appearance, and if we don't worry about clean energy, the appearance of the Earth in the future is not going to be so great. I get that from this paragraph, but I'm not totally sure how this is all working together, so I need more clarity as I'm reading in order to understand the connection between these ideas. However, you will notice that the student did cite 3 sources within this particular paragraph. So the student is citing correctly, putting it in parentheses at the end of the sentence. I just think that the ideas are moving too quickly. So we do have another sentence of commentary here. This helps with creating more energy for houses and buildings. So that's later on in the paragraph. I do think that thought could be expanded more, but I do like the presence of commentary. I just think the ideas, like I said, are moving too quickly. And then the concluding sentence, therefore people should consider that the benefits of basing energy off of wind outweighs the consequences. So this would be a little bit better if we had more specifics about what those consequences are, because I don't think that was fully established in the body paragraph. So you'll see that I mostly noted on the side that there needs to be more connection. So if you scroll down, or if I scroll down, I took the same paragraph and I color coded it by topic shifts. So I tried to highlight everything that was related to appearance in this blue color, and then stuff that was related to the gases in purple, and then other colors for efficiency and things like that. So you'll notice that we have some predominantly blue in the top. Okay, so there was, like I said, a really good analysis of appearance, at least the start of it. We just need to kind of develop it more. So I would say if the student's going to revise this essay, that the beginning half of this paragraph or beginning third of this paragraph is strong. It just needs more attention to appearance. In fact, I think appearance could stand alone as its own topic. I don't think we need to bring up some of these other things in this paragraph. So what I would consider as far as advice for the student would be that it seems like things are kind of out of order. So it seems like the student wants to talk about efficiency and how it's a clean, renewable resource. I would suggest that the student talk about that first and have a body paragraph about how it's a clean, renewable resource, and then have a separate paragraph about how one concern might be aesthetics and appearance and how we can kind of work through that as maybe not being a huge factor to consider. So I think the student has two major things going on. The problem is it's all kind of smushed into this one paragraph. And so we have layers, but the layers move too quickly. So sometimes if you just color code things based on how it looks, like, okay, everything related to this topic is in one color, everything related to this topic is in another color. If you see like one predominant color, that means you're talking about that topic quite a lot. So even though there's a lot of blue here, we need to develop it more. But if you see that you're switching colors really frequently, like we have in the latter half of this paragraph, it most likely means that you're talking about too many things in one paragraph, or you're just not connecting your ideas and not developing them enough. So like I said, lots of potential here, but in terms of execution, I just think it shows that the student was trying really hard to get thoughts on paper in 40 minutes. Okay, so I have my suggestions, basically what I've already talked about. Group the benefits and put that first, and then create a separate paragraph about aesthetics. And so you'll see the conclusion paragraph here. It says having wind turbines is cleaner for the environment and society than basing energy off of materials that have a chance of running out. So that is a defensible statement. It's not totally connecting back to the prompt at hand, and we need to know what these materials actually are. So I think there is a line of reasoning that's trying to be established here, but I think the student, upon revision, can go back and clarify some of these things. So restructuring this essay will help, and then really making sure that the thesis statement answers the question about establishing a wind farm and what factors need to be considered. I think that will really help the structure of the essay as well. So not a bad attempt. I think there was some good commentary in here, lots of potential. But this just shows kind of like what can happen when you know what you're supposed to do, but you're just struggling with the time constraints of that essay. Our next essay, we have student B, and the main things I'm going to talk about here are developing a concession and commentary, and also paragraph order. So you'll see here that we have a sentence at the beginning. It says, the wind industry has come around with positives and negatives. I do not like sentences like this because they're equivocation. So basically equivocating is when you offer both sides of the issue, you're really wishy-washy. All of the issues that you could talk about for the synthesis essay or the argumentative essay are going to have positives and negatives. That's why they're giving you that question, so that you can navigate the pros and cons and assert a position. So we want to avoid sentences like this because we don't sound sophisticated as a writer if we say that something has pros and cons. So that's an understood thing that we don't need to say. So I would really encourage the student to either omit that sentence completely or to be more specific about why there are pros and cons, positives and negatives to the wind farm controversy, I guess you could say. So what are these pros and cons? What are the two different sides of the argument? Things like that. So we need to be more specific in our context if we're going to talk about the pros and cons as a lead-in. Now, the thesis statement, or attempt at a thesis statement in the introduction, says, while the wind turbines create clean energy, unlike coal, they create loud sounds through the day and can be expensive if they are not placed in a good windy area. Okay, so we have a defensible claim. I think the student did a good job with like basically analyzing the counter argument and creating like an although this, therefore this kind of sentence. So that's a positive. I'm going to scroll down to the conclusion paragraph just to see if they wrote a sentence in the conclusion that is more in tune with what the prompt is actually asking. So we have, if you see it here, when establishing a wind farm, one must consider placement, cost, and clean power. Basically, if it's worth it. Now, I would be a little bit careful with phrasing like if it's worth it, because what is it in this case? But I think that sentence would definitely be a defensible thesis statement in terms of the prompt. So I like the way these are working together, but that is one thing that I wanted to show you guys, is just that sometimes what you write as a thesis statement in the intro, it might answer a defensible position, I guess you could say, but we really, really want to try to specifically address the prompt at hand. Now, as we move forward into AP Lang, as the years go on and we have this new rubric and we have more samples, I think we can be a little bit more open with these thesis statements. But right now, in 2019 to 2020, it seems like the samples at hand that we've been given tend to have a very closed, very specific thesis. So my advice to students to earn this thesis point is to make sure that you're very clearly answering the prompt. And I would say if you do it in the introduction and the conclusion, you increase your chances of getting that thesis point. I do think the thesis point is rather easy to earn, but if you know you're not the type of person who paces to write a full out conclusion, make sure that you have a strong thesis in the introduction. And so that thesis in the conclusion, I think, is definitely in line with the prompt, but I do like the position in the intro. So we have a defensible thesis. Now, looking at the body paragraphs, the biggest thing I'm noticing here is that the student is using sources, but we have lead-ins to these sources that are a little bit heavy-handed. So for instance, it says, Julia Layton says, and then we have a quote. At this point in the essay, we don't know who Julia Layton is, so it's not quite well developed. However, in the second paragraph, it says Daniel Shepard, a lecturer at the University of Technology, says. So in that instance, we know exactly who our student writer is talking about. So it is okay to use the author's name in relation to the source. I like that the student still put the source name in parentheses, but we need people's credentials if you're going to be citing them. So I have no clue who Julia Layton is. Like, obviously I read the sources, but if I just read this essay, I would need a little bit more clarity. So my advice is to not always rely on the author's name, but to just work on embedding your evidence. So let's look at this first body paragraph. It says, wind power will never run out. Wind will always be a weather factor on Earth, but some people believe wind turbines are not reliable. Okay, decent opening. Then we have Julia Layton, who says that wind turbines can't always run 100% power. Okay, so basically we're using this quote to relate to the previous sentence, okay? Then it says, people support the turbines because they create clean energy, and the wind industry says the amount of unclean energy used is far too small to defeat the benefits. Okay, so my advice to this student, I think the main idea here is trying to prove that wind energy might be unreliable, but it's still effective. We want to develop this paragraph a little bit more. So we're citing the same source twice in one paragraph. That's not wrong, that's totally fine, but I would recommend not ending a paragraph with a quote. We want to add more commentary. So there doesn't seem to be a concluding sentence in this paragraph. We use concluding sentences to tie back to our thesis statement to establish a line of reasoning. So we want to be really clear what the main idea of each paragraph is. So I think we're trying to establish the benefits here, but I don't think it's fully laid out. So it's just that the paragraph seems a bit unfinished. Not that it's bad or anything, it's just that we kind of end rather abruptly. So when you're planning an essay, I know that some students don't like to outline because they think it wastes time, but I would really ask yourself, okay, what is my thesis? And then how am I going to prove it? So what are the main points I want to address? It's really helpful to have a main point of each paragraph. And I know that sounds really basic, but a lot of times, especially when we're struggling with the time constraints, we kind of like go all over the place because we're trying to say too many things at one time, or we underdevelop. And looking at these paragraphs, granted they're typed, they're not handwritten. It looked way different in handwriting. But I think we have some underdevelopment going on in terms of trying to write like an essay that's a little bit higher scoring. So then we move into Daniel Shepard in this paragraph talking about how the turbines make noise and it can be annoying. So it says that one solution would be to keep it away from residential living. So I like the idea of talking about noise. I like the idea of talking about benefits first and then going into one of the problems, but I just don't think we've really established why wind energy is super beneficial, and then I think the noise aspect is underdeveloped. So what I would like to see for a revision in this is to really look at the connection between the noise and then like sleep deprivation, and then talk about how a solution would be to think of location, not to put it near a residential area. So the noise can impact sleep. It's not the only thing that can impact sleep, but if people are not sleeping because of these wind turbines and the noise, then it's going to impact their performance at school or in their jobs, things like that. So again, we have a clear idea of what this paragraph is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be talking about the negatives and like how one negative is the noise, but we're not really connecting our ideas here. There is no connection from body paragraph 1 to body paragraph 2, and we're not really establishing why this is a problem that we should care about. So then when we actually have a solution in the last sentence, there's little payoff to that solution. So again, it's just underdeveloped. So not bad. We just need to connect our ideas a little bit more. And then our third paragraph here, it says, according to Rainey Mola, data proves that wind energy is more efficient. Okay, so just reading this topic sentence alone, I'm gonna say that this paragraph somehow relates more closely to body paragraph 1 as opposed to body paragraph 2. Therefore, in terms of structure, if this is talking about one of the benefits, like in this case, it looks like it's talking about the cost effectiveness, we need to group our benefits together. So body paragraph 3 and body paragraph 1 likely need to be combined. And if we can create a bridge between those two ideas, the benefits of wind energy, it would develop the paragraph even more. So it's not that the student necessarily underdeveloped paragraph 1. Well, I mean, they did, but if they combine paragraph 3 and paragraph 1, we now have a much more developed paragraph, but we're going from like benefits to problems back to benefits, and it doesn't create a smooth line of reasoning. So we have the right ideas here. If we can combine paragraph 1 and paragraph 3, we'd have a stronger paragraph about benefits. If we could develop paragraph 2 to include some of the negatives, and I would look at something else besides noise. So noise would be one part of it, but what else is another complaint that people have? So if we can kind of restructure this essay and develop the existing ideas, I think it's definitely going to be a much higher score. And then it looks like the conclusion has a little bit of commentary in it. I like what the student did in the conclusion. It says we need to protect our planet, but we cannot live without energy. Therefore, wind energy is the best option in regard to both cleanliness and cost. Okay, so paragraph 1, paragraph 3, establishing wind farms will help our society thrive. It's our responsibility to use them responsibly. Love the last commentary in this paragraph. I would definitely keep that. I think if we restructure this essay, it has the potential to be a much stronger essay in general. So that's my recommendation for student B. Okay, so for student C, I'm gonna kind of walk you guys through the line of reasoning here because I like what this student did. Now, this particular student started with some commentary as their context. So basically leading in by talking about why there is a need for energy and then talking about wind energy. So there's a nice transition there. You'll notice that I highlighted the sentence in red. I would not award the thesis statement point for this sentence, but if you guys give me a second, I'm gonna scroll down and I would award the thesis statement point for the sentence that is the conclusion paragraph. So you sometimes have very short conclusions and that's okay. I like that the student kind of tied everything up. So it says, upon evaluating the pros and cons of wind power, one will see that environmental care and price should be considered over factors such as noise or the petty complaint of disrupted aesthetics. So that tells me very clearly which factors should be considered over which other factors. And the word choice here, like petty complaint, tells me that the person does not think aesthetics are a very important factor. So I like the word choice here, and it kind of creates a hierarchy, which is something that I've actually talked about in some of my previous videos on the channel. So that's something that my students are working on, is like not just thinking of factors, but also figuring out which factors are more important than others, because that helps create a line of reasoning. So now that we know the student would have the thesis statement point, let's actually look at these body paragraphs. So the student did paraphrase sources. You can see here that we have source B, source F, source D, source C, and source E. So using a variety of sources, you do not get any extra points for using more sources, but you do need to use and correctly cite 3 sources, either as a direct quote or as a paraphrase. My recommendation would be to look for relationships between sources. So it is okay to have 1 source per paragraph, but we're gonna talk about one of these paragraphs in a second that has 2 sources that are different in the same paragraph to establish a stronger line of reasoning, and I think that's a skill to work toward. So you'll see here that in the first body paragraph, the student is talking about kind of like the environmental concerns. I do think the student could develop these ideas a little bit more, but it is a timed essay, so we treat these like a rough draft. So you'll notice that the student cited source B, but then what I like most is that we transition to the second paragraph, and I like this idea of connecting the ideas. So I'm gonna highlight it here. It says, not only is wind power better for the environment, but it runs more efficiently. So here we have a body paragraph talking about how it's better for the environment, and then this next body paragraph is going to be talking about how it is more efficient. And so you'll see that there are 2 sources cited in this paragraph. So the student wrote a very effective topic sentence, and we want our paragraphs to connect well. And so topic sentences, especially going from body paragraph 1 to body paragraph 2 or even 3, the topic sentences become more important because if we can create a bridge between ideas, it really helps our line of reasoning. So I like this topic sentence. The student basically used information, I believe, from one of the charts or tables in source F. So sometimes students struggle with how to write about that, but if you could take the statistics or the facts or things like that and just write it in a paraphrase, it's usually a little bit more helpful. So then we have this connection here between efficiency, and then it brings up this idea that oil, the mineral rights are underground, but wind turbines, all the profit comes from above ground. So there's a contrast there, and you'll see that the student then uses McCamey, Texas as an example, because a lot of times in synthesis essays, they'll give you a positive example and sometimes even a negative example. And so McCamey, Texas, if you guys haven't read the sources, is a town that relied on oil. Their economy went down, and then they switched to wind farms, and basically that helped restore their economy. So the student is looking at the relationship of that here. So I think this is a good way to introduce McCamey, Texas, and to kind of create layers to this particular paragraph. So I like that the student used 2 sources and kind of tried to connect 2 ideas within the same paragraph. Now let's look at how the student progresses. So we see 2 common arguments against wind power. So this is another transition here because the student is taking the positives, and then now we're moving into the negatives. So you can see that this topic sentence is not so much taking an idea from the previous paragraph and connecting it to the new idea, but it's clear that, okay, we've talked about the benefits, but now let's look at the other side of it. So kind of like addressing the counter argument. So I like this topic sentence as well. I think it serves a different purpose than the previous topic sentence, but it definitely is working. So then we see that the student is going to talk about noise. So we have a direct quote here from source C, and then I like to see language like this. However, one fails to consider, so that means that the student is about to assert his or her own position. We see some transitional phrases like as previously stated. That's fine. We do like to see transitional phrases between paragraphs and within paragraphs to move from idea to idea. So that's also good. And then the student ended with a source, but I think it's just because it's a paraphrase here. So we see that altering the landscape is a small complaint, and the student's kind of talking about the visual aspects. I do think that the student could have, if they had more time, developed the visual side of things more, but I do like the connection between 2 different complaints being addressed in one paragraph. And something to think about proportionally is that we have 2 paragraphs here about the pros, if you will, and then 1 about the cons. So I like that the student looked at 2 complaints but put it in one paragraph, because then the majority of the essay still seems to be about the positives. So instead of making it even and doing 2 paragraphs against and 2 paragraphs for, we have 2 paragraphs for and then 2 ideas against, but they're refuted within one paragraph. So that's just something to think about as well. So I do think some of this could be more developed if the student had more time, but I like the order of things. I like how it sums up at the end, and I like the progression of ideas. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this kind of video and want to see more essay walkthroughs on my channel, then please give the video a thumbs up or let me know in the comment section below. Please make sure that you are subscribed, that way you don't miss any future AP Lang content. Turn those notifications on, and until next time guys, happy writing!